The scripture for today's teaching is from Isaiah 9, 2 through 7. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of deep darkness, on them has light shone. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. For the yoke of his burden and the staff for his shoulders, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For every boot of tramping warrior and battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. This is the word of God to us.
Thanks be to God. Hey, good morning. You guys can grab a seat. If you and I have not had a chance to meet yet, my name is Andrew. I get to serve as one of our pastors here, and I want to say welcome to you. Thanks for coming on our COVID snowstorm Sunday. It's great to have you. Honestly shocked that this many people showed up. So it's great to have you. You guys are the serious ones. Hey, so a few things real quick before we jump into Isaiah 9. If you have a Bible, that's where we're going to be. We're going to camp out in Isaiah chapter 9. And if you don't have a Bible, don't worry about it. We're going to have the slides up on the screen with the text. But want to say thank you so much for praying for me and for Pastor Sean. Both of us were out last week. We woke up a little bit sick Sunday morning. It was crazy. It was one of those things that in 2019 we wouldn't have thought twice about it. Like maybe it's just allergies, you know? But with 2020, you're like, maybe the COVID has come for me and it's my time, you know? And so got tested. It was negative. We're all feeling great. I was feeling fine by Monday. So really bummed to miss being with you. But it was also really fun to have Chad from our downtown congregation come and preach the word. I heard he did great. I try to not have him come too much so that you don't know how bad of a preacher I am. But alas, he was here with us last week. So Isaiah 9, that's where we're going to jump in. Maybe you're like me and you did not grow up in a church with an Advent tradition. So this whole thing about Advent is new to you. If you don't know what Advent is, let me just take a second and set it up and explain. So Advent is the season that starts the Sunday after Thanksgiving, leading up to Christmas Day. And what you're doing in the season is stepping into the longing and the celebration of the arrival of Jesus. So it's this weird twofold tension that you're stepping into. On the one hand, as followers of Jesus, what we're doing is we're remembering that Jesus has arrived. He has come. And on the other hand, what we're doing is we're looking at the brokenness of our world and we're longing for his final return, where he will come to make all things new and wipe away every tear from every eye. So that's what's happening in the season. And it's interesting about this word Advent because it comes from an actual Roman ceremony that used to exist like in the 1st and 2nd century, where the Caesar, the king or the Caesar of Rome, would be out in battle. He'd be out waging war and fighting often for months on end, and then he would return home. And rumors of his return would be echoing through the village, echoing through the town. And what would happen is when he would come back from battle, essentially the village would get out of their houses, they would gather in the streets, and they would hold what was called an Adventist ceremony, where they would welcome the arrival and the return of the king, and they would celebrate his victory over their enemies. And what I love about the early church is they're just shameless, man. They're like, you know what, that sounds like a great idea for what Jesus really was doing with his arrival on earth and with his final return. So they took that idea and instead didn't apply it to Caesar, applied it to King Jesus and said, he has come and he has defeated our enemies of Satan, sin, and death. And we are celebrating that, but also longing for the day where he fully returns. So that's what Advent is. And as Sean just said, we're in week 3 of our Advent series, and we've titled the series, A Weary World Rejoices. I don't always give you the title of our series, and usually it's because it's like Philippians. There you go. We just called it Philippians. But I feel like this idea of a weary world rejoicing is something that we all need desperately right now. Amen? We feel the weight of a weary world, and we need some rejoicing. Now, here's the problem. The problem with especially people in Oklahoma, if I can just critique us for a minute, People that consider themselves to be Christians in Oklahoma often don't know why we're celebrating. They know that they should be filled with joy. They know that we should be happy, but they look around at the world and they're going, nothing around this world makes me want to be filled with joy right now. So what we do is we kind of paint on a smile and we put on this veneer of joy and we try to step into the holiday season. And it's so funny. If you ever ask anybody in church in Oklahoma, hey, how you doing? I'm doing great, doing really great. Things are great. It's like, really? You said great like 4 times just now. I don't think you're doing great, you know? And really what's happening is there's all kinds of pain in our own life, pain in our world, and we don't know why to celebrate. We don't know why we're actually filled with joy. I feel like there's a piece of art that I want to show you up on the slide that kind of resembles what I experience as most people in Oklahoma's experience of Christmas. This is a piece of art from the famous Thomas Kinkade, and it's just serene, isn't it? It's serene, but if I critique it a little bit, it's a little bit too sterile. And it's a little bit too cute. And I think that it's missing something. So Thomas Kinkade, let's talk about Thomas Kinkade for just a second, because why not? So Thomas Kinkade was probably one of the most famous evangelical artists of our day. And at his height in his career in 2001, he generated about $130 million in sales. His art was hanging in 1 out of every 20 homes in America. He was known as the painter of light. There's something about Thomas Kinkade and his paintings and his art that just let people feel like, that's cute, and that's calm, and that's serene. And so it's very, very popular in Christian bookstores and hanging in people's homes. My own grandma had his art, that would be a little creepy, had his art hanging all over her house. And it was just this really, really, kind of calm. She'd bring him out in the holiday season. And when Thomas Kinkade was asked about his own art and his approach, how do you approach art philosophically? Here's what he said. I found this really interesting. He said, I like to portray a world without the fall. I like to portray a world without the fall. In other words, my goal of my art is to try to show you what life would look like if the realities of sin and darkness didn't exist. This is why he was known as the painter of light. I want to show a world without the fall. Now, that might sound noble. That might sound like a really good thing to do. So let's show the world what the world could look like without the fall. But here's the sad reality about Thomas Kinkade's inner life, is even though he was surrounding himself with art devoid of the fall, he himself had the realities of the fall that were so overwhelmingly prevalent. He was addicted to alcohol and Valium. He could not stay away from strip clubs. His addiction to alcohol and Valium got so out of control that at the height of his career, he actually had to file bankruptcy, ended up spiraling in all kinds of ways, pushed his family away. Ultimately, his wife ended up leaving him. He was at a Siegfried and Roy show in Las Vegas and got kicked out of the show because he kept yelling at one of the aging magicians, kept yelling a really derogatory term that I'm not going to say from the pulpit, kept calling him this horrible name, and eventually got kicked out of the show. He was caught urinating on a Winnie the Pooh statue at a Disneyland hotel, and when asked about why he did it, his defense for his behavior was he was, quote, ritual territory marking. Like, this dude was dark. There was a lot of stuff in his life that were really, really broken. He ended up being found dead, overdosing on alcohol and Valium. The painter of light had a world of darkness in his heart that he was trying to shut off and just present an alternative vision of this world that didn't have sin inside of it at all. So look at this photo again and just think about that. Here is his understanding of the Christmas story, this nativity scene, this famous scene, but removed of all darkness and brokenness. And here's what I want to show you today, based on Isaiah 9, that actually when you remove darkness from the story, you remove the whole point of the story. When you take out all the darkness and the realities of the fall, then I get why, as people in Oklahoma, we just feel like we need to paint on the smile and have some fake faux version of happiness, when in reality we're really overwhelmed at the darkness and the brokenness of our world. But that's not where the story starts. Isaiah 9 is going to actually tell us that it starts with darkness. So look at Isaiah 9, verse 2. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwell in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shone. So 3 quick things that I want to show you about the Christmas story. But first, let me give you some context real quick. So Isaiah 9, as we're kind of parachuting into the story, you got to understand a few things. The first is that God's desire has always been to be with his people. He always wants to be with humanity. There's this inseparable thing inside of God where he's not content to just live without us for whatever reason. He longs to be with us. That's actually why he made us. And he didn't have to do that, but he actually wanted to be with us and us to be with him the same way that the Father has been with the Son and the Spirit and the Son have been with the Father since before all time. So he creates humanity and he loves humanity, but humanity continues to rebel and reject God. And so what God does is he eventually chooses the people of Israel and says, I'm choosing you out of everybody. I want you to be my special people. And he redeems them out of their slavery in Egypt. He lavishes his love and mercy on them, passes over them in the Exodus story, and actually doesn't pour out his judgment on them. He brings them to the promised land. He gives them his law at Mount Sinai to form them as the unique people of God. And over, he's giving them the sense of, here's who you are, and here's my love, and here's my mercy, and here's how I want you to live. And yet the people of Israel, they continue to take the good benefits from God, but they reject God. They continue to enjoy the fruit of the kingdom of God, but they don't want anything to do with the king. So what they're doing is saying, no, actually, we want to be in charge, and we want to have the right to say what's good and evil in our life. We want your stuff, but we don't want you. And this is the story that plays out again and again. And instead of the people of Israel rejecting God and being brought into a deeper sense of life and meaning and significance, they're actually brought into deeper levels of slavery and bondage and tyranny. And what happens is this story, the cyclical story, keeps repeating over and over and over. And Isaiah is being raised up by God because the people of Israel are in another stage of rebellion again. And Isaiah is being raised up to say, hey, tell the people, warn the people that if they continue rejecting me, if they continue disconnecting their lives from my presence, it's not going to lead them to light and life. It's going to lead them to darkness and death. And so this is what Isaiah is writing, is saying, hey, Israel, come back to God. Return to God, because if not, the Assyrian army is going to come in, they're going to invade, they're going to drag your sons and your daughters off into exile. And Isaiah writing says, the people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. So here's the first thing I want you to see, is that you and I were lost in darkness. The people of Israel's story is not just unique to them. It's not like you read the Old Testament and go, how could they? You actually are supposed to read the Old Testament and go, oh, that sounds like me. That sounds like our story, because ever since Genesis 3, you and I have been doing the same exact thing. Hey, God, thank you for your gifts, but actually I want to push you out, and I want to be the one that gets to call the shots on this deal. And instead of that bringing us into life and pleasure and meaning and significance, it's brought us, in the words of Isaiah, into darkness. Listen to his honest assessment of humanity. He says, we were a people who walked in darkness. We were a people who dwelt in a land of deep darkness. Think about that word darkness for just a minute. And maybe you'll understand why we light the candles one more every Sunday as we get closer to Christmas. Think about darkness for just a second. Our world doesn't really have a category for sin right now, especially in American culture. In fact, I think in American culture, the only thing that is sin is to call something a sin. That's like definitely a sin to do. You can't say anything's a sin. So what happens is this weird tension where we don't know how to describe the brokenness and the evil that exists all around us. And you can see this in news headlines, and anytime there's something tragic happening or something that's painful, that we struggle as a people to even know how to describe what it is that's happening. And Isaiah is giving us language. He's saying it's darkness, it's evil, it's sin. So when you think of darkness or you think of sin, what are some things that come to mind? I think one of the things that comes to mind first for a lot of us when we think of sin is this idea. I'll show you this slide here. This is a picture of shame. Sin sometimes causes you to do things that you never saw yourself doing, or not doing things that you know that you're supposed to do, and it creates a level of shame where it's more than guilt. It's like, I know that I did something wrong, but I actually feel like deep down I myself am broken. I myself am wrong. I'm unworthy to be loved because of the things that I've done. And I think a lot of us, when we envision sin or darkness in our own life, it's very individualized. It's like, I've done some things that if I could do anything to get back, I would do. If I could do anything to remove that from my story, I would pay whatever amount of money I could to remove that from my story. But actually, the Bible has a bigger definition of shame and sin and darkness that I want to kind of bring you in on. When you think of darkness, don't just think of your own individual story. Here's a photo. Maybe you remember this. This is in Sri Lanka in 2019. Do you remember this? In Sri Lanka, on Easter Sunday, there were like 5 different major bombs that exploded in churches as people were gathering to worship the risen Jesus. 321 Christians were killed that day. And you look at this image and you think, man, I completely forgot about that because 2020 has been such a blur. Completely forgot that this happened. And you know what you call when people use violence to display their hatred for someone else's religion? We call that sin. We call it darkness. That's what Isaiah is talking about. Here's another slide I'll show you. Now, regardless of your political perspective on immigration, I want you to kind of just put that to the side for a second, and I want you to immerse yourself into this photo. Look at the little boy, 6 years old, this woman who's in tears. She had traveled 1,500 miles away. She had sold all of her possessions to take her only 6-year-old son and escape for a better life. She got about 10 feet away from the border before she got caught. And this made the news. She was pleading with the officer, please let my son go in. Please let my son go in. And again, regardless of your perspective on immigration, how bad must someone's life be in another place that they're willing to sell everything that they have, travel 1,500 miles, and do whatever it takes to get their son into a different country? Do you know what you call tyrannical governments that abuse and hurt and rape their people and pillage and destroy? You call that sin. You call it darkness. Here's another photo. Again, maybe you don't even remember this. Do you guys remember like the cathedral at Notre Dame caught on fire and burned? And I remember watching this happen on the news thinking, oh, like that's such a crazy deal. I didn't get to go ever see this in person, and now they're rebuilding it. It's going to take like 100 years or something to rebuild. But I never got to see this, and I remember watching this happen live thinking, what a picture of life in 2019 right now. Like, I remember 2019 feeling like such a drag. Like, my gosh, I can't wait for 2020 to be over. The cathedral caught on fire at Notre Dame. How bad is this world? And then 2020 happened. Next slide. And it's like, oh yeah, things could get worse. I didn't realize. Wow, the year of vision turned into the year of COVID. And I remember like being so excited for 2019 to be over to then transitioning to this weird moment where I was just excited to buy toilet paper. I mean, like, what is happening in our world? I've never been this excited to find a roll of toilet paper. And yet, you know, this is a common thing that you see as people's fear levels continue to rise and they do things that are irrational. Think about the sad cancellations of this year. You're going into your senior year and you roll into 2020 and no one can be there to celebrate your graduation. What a sad deal. You think about this photo, like stuff you never could have dreamed happening in our world. This is Texas inmates in a Texas prison who got paid $2 an hour to carry bodies of people that had died from COVID from one place to the next. And like, your brain struggles to get a category for that, but let me give you a category for all of that. Do you know what it is? It's darkness. That's what it is. It's darkness. Here's another photo. This has been a common occurrence. And again, regardless of your perspective or your position or whatever, the reality is our world is more racially fractured than it has ever been. And all the distance and all the frustrations that have been underlying in the surface, there's more tension now than there's ever been. And this is the world that we live in shortly after the death of George Floyd. Here's another photo I'll show you. The wildfires that are just burning down whole sections of California and Colorado. And you look at this and go, what's wrong with our world? And Isaiah 9 is saying, darkness. We live in a land of deep darkness. Here's one more photo. I'll show you actually two more. This is the gift that keeps on giving, isn't it? You thought it was over on November 3rd, and still to this day, there's news headlines that are showing you things are not quite over yet. I remember looking at this photo, this next one here, and thinking, man, what a crazy deal. We live in one nation that's actually two nations, with very different perspectives and persuasions. And I was joking with somebody earlier, and we were talking about Catholics and Protestants getting along, and they said, now if we could just get Republicans and Democrats to get along. And it's like, no, that's way harder than Catholics and Protestants right now, Like, I just don't see that happening. We live in this divided world, brother against brother. Do you know what you call that? Darkness. Isaiah is trying to give us language as a people and as a culture that you and I live in darkness. If you missed the news last night, can I sum it up for you? We live in a land of deep darkness. If you get on Facebook for 10 minutes, it's we live in a land of deep darkness. This is the reality, and you can't just rush to the light. You got to first remember that this is where we are. Don't Thomas Kincaid the Christmas story just yet. Things are really broken, things are really messy, and this is where you and I find ourselves. And if you're honest about your own story, even this last year, some of the most shameful things that have happened, some of the most painful things that have happened, probably are not a result of the news headlines as much as they are moments in your own story in life where you said, get out, God, I want to be you. I don't need you as king, I would rather be king myself. So we live in a land of deep darkness. Here's the second thing I want you to see. We cannot save ourselves. Now, some of you are like, is this a Christmas sermon? Like, Merry Christmas, everybody. We live in darkness. We can't save ourselves. Like, this is maybe not starting off on a good foot for some of us, but this is the reality. We cannot save ourselves. This idea of darkness in Isaiah 9 means two things. The first thing that it means is that we live in darkness, meaning there's evil and brokenness and suffering and tragedy in our world. Right? That's true. But there's another way to think about darkness, and that's that you and I don't have what it takes to get out of the darkness. We don't have light in ourselves to fix the problem. And Isaiah is actually going to talk about this right before he gets to chapter 9. He's going to tell us how we got into this mess in the first place. So look at Isaiah 8, verse 21. It says, they will pass through the land, greatly distressed and hungry. The more these people are rejecting God, here's what's happening. Now look at this. And they will look to the earth, but behold, distress and darkness, the gloom of anguish, and they will be thrust into thick darkness. Things are going to get bad, and the natural human tendency is to look to the earth, is what Isaiah is saying. What does it mean to look to the earth? Looking to the earth is looking to human resources to fix the problem. It's looking to technology. It's looking to the experts or more education or a killer app or a vaccine or whatever. Something that's going to come along and fix us, or a political system or a certain leader or a certain approach or a certain life hack. Like we're looking to human resources to say, man, things are really dark, but if we band together and if we try really hard and if we advance hard enough with our technology, surely things are going to fix themselves. We can get up and to the right if we try hard enough. And I remember growing up, we just all thought that we were living in a world that was up and to the right, didn't we? Technology was advancing, new and cooler things were coming out left and right. We just thought, man, we are unstoppable as a people. This is amazing. And now the most technologically advanced culture, the last 130 years have been the bloodiest in our history. Like all our technology is just giving us new ways to sin, and new ways to find darkness, and new ways to do things that are dysfunctional. And we use all of our amazing technology to send each other talking poop emojis, which, by the way, I love. My phone just updated, and now I can do that, and I've been missing out on that for 2 years. Now I can send talking poop emojis. So that's what we use our technology for. We live in darkness, and we band together, and instead of us getting to the light, we can't seem to save ourselves. We can't seem to fix it. Our world seems broken, and you and I don't know really what to do to fix it. This is the reality of Christmas. It's not saying, hey, come in and paint a smile on your face. Hey, come in and pretend that everything is okay. Hey, come in and just act like things are normal. It's saying, no, things are really bleak, but there is hope. Tim Keller says it this way. He says, Christmas, therefore, is the most unsentimental realistic way of looking at life. It does not say, cheer up, if we all pull together, we can make the world a better place. Christianity does not agree with the optimistic thinkers who say, we can fix things if we try hard enough, nor does it agree with the pessimists who see only a dystopian future. The message of Christianity is instead, things really are this bad, and we can't heal or save ourselves. Things really are this dark. Nevertheless, there is hope. And it's to that hope that I want to turn your attention to now. Look at Isaiah 9, verse 2 one more time. The people who walked in darkness, that's us, have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of deep darkness, what happened? On them has light shone. Third thing I want you to see is the light has come for us. We were lost in the darkness, and this passage is saying the light of Jesus came to those in darkness. What's so crazy about the story of Christmas is the darkness is not something that scares God off. It's not like he's like, ooh, gross, sin, get out. Sin is saying, ooh, gross, God, get out. And God is constantly, persistently driving towards us, saying, I still want you. I still want to be with you. And actually, he lowers himself to the lowest level of darkness by entering human history, not as this flaming, powerful deity, but as this little breakable baby to enter into the darkness and eventually be swallowed up by the darkness so that you and I could be redeemed and brought into the light. This is the story of Christmas, that the darkness didn't scare God away. He came for us. He wanted to be with us. He wanted to fix our broken world. And so think about this idea of this light being a symbol for Jesus. Isaiah is using the symbol of the sun rising in the darkest part of the night to bring light and saying this is kind of like what the very presence of Jesus is for our world. Think about the sun in the sky for just a minute. It literally provides life. If the sun were to burn out, we couldn't survive. Acts 17 says that it's in him that we live and move and have our being. So the sun produces life. The very presence of Jesus is what sustains our life. The sun, in addition to that, helps us see reality. Like nobody's going to sign up for open heart surgery in a dark ER operating room where they can't see anything. Like no one's going to do that. You need light for something like that. No one's going to drive in the middle of nowhere with their headlights turned off because you will crash. And it's the very presence of Jesus as he enters into our world that helps us see the world and ourselves and other relationships in humanity rightly. He actually helps shine a light in such a way that we can understand here's who we are, and here's why we are, and here's what it is that we're supposed to do. And in addition to that, the sun literally can give people joy. My grandpa was stationed in Iceland for a couple years, and I remember, I look at pictures of Iceland, and I'm like, I would love to go there on vacation. He hated it. He hated living there. He said he was there, and for 6 months, it was dark all the time, and he just couldn't stand it. Got so depressing, so sad. He said him and the other people that he was stationed there with were just like a level of depression set in that you could not break out of. And we know these stories, don't we? I heard a story about a village, a town in southern Norway. I'm not going to try to say the name because I can't pronounce it. But they live in the base of a valley. So there's mountains on all sides of this village. You have to take a cable car to get into the village. And what's fascinating about this village is that even though you can see there's light in the village, for most of the year, the way that they sit inside of this valley, for most of the year, they don't see the sun at all, and they can never have direct sunlight on their skin. So they can see light, but they can't see the sun, and they can't have direct sun rays shining on their skin. The whole village is crazy depressed and sad for most of the year. It's a real thing. They're just really struggling with it. And actually, they have to take the cable car all the way up the mountain to get to where they can have the sun shining on them. And that was until 2013, a guy named Martin Anderson came up with this idea. I'll show you photos. 3 giant rotating mirrors that will take the light from the sun and reflect it down into the valley. And this next slide here, this is when they first got together. The whole village gathers in this little town square area, and they throw this amazing party just to like soak up the sun. Like they're going berserk over this. They're like, oh my gosh, sunlight, you know? And it's something that you don't think about, but this is how happy they are to be just in the ray of the sun. This is why Jesus came. People in darkness so that we could do this, so that we could experience the light and the life and the joy and the beauty of being brought back to God and having our lives reoriented. This is what Christmas is all about. Now, how does he dispel the darkness? Well, look at what this light comes to do. Isaiah 9, verse 3. You have multiplied the nation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. The light comes to the darkness of depression and sorrow and brings joy, right? Like the joy of the harvest. You and I, because we're not farmers, we don't really relate to that. It's saying the joy of a Christmas bonus, right? Like the joy of the unexpected gift. Like that's what he came for, was to bring people lost in sorrow joy. He goes on, verse 4, for the yoke of his burden and the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. He's saying, I'm going to come into the place of darkness, of oppression and injustice, and I'm going to bring light and life. I'm going to bring a sense of freedom and joy. And then he goes on, this is one of the most poetic lines in all of Isaiah 9. He says in verse 5, for every boot of the tramping warrior and battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. Do you know what he's saying? He's saying, hey, those boots of war, throw them in the fire. You don't need them anymore because I'm coming to the darkness of war and I'm bringing peace. All the bloodstained garments, all the tragedy and all the loss and all the devastation, burn those garments. We don't need them anymore because I'm coming to end the darkness and bring peace. This is what this tiny little baby in the manger is all about. Look at verse 6. It keeps going. It says, for to us a child is born, to us a son is given. And look at this. The government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. And on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. He says, to us a child is born. How fascinating that this king who is coming for us doesn't come as this flaming deity, this obvious king. He doesn't walk up to Caesar and go, sorry, you're sitting in my chair. I'm the new ruler of this world. He comes to shepherds. He comes to Mary. He comes to the poor. He comes to the nobodies as a breakable little baby, and not just a breakable little baby, but look, to us a child is born, to us a son is given. This is what the story of Christmas is all about. We were lost in darkness. We could not save ourselves, but to us a child is born, and to us a son is given. The very light and life of God has entered our world to dispel all the darkness. And even though we live in a world that's still marked by sin, there's coming a day where he's going to wipe away every tear from every eye, remove every ounce of the curse, and make his blessing flow in all places to us. This is what Christmas this is what we're celebrating during this season. Finally, how does he do this? Look at Isaiah 53. Let me read this to you. This is how he dispels the darkness. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken and smitten by God and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We've turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. This light, this baby, grows up and lives the perfect life that we couldn't live. And on the cross, He doesn't just absorb the darkness, he's overpowered by the darkness, ultimately to the point of his own death. He gives his death as a gift, and on the cross, Jesus takes every ounce of our sin, our shame, our guilt, our darkness, the darkness of our world. It's put on him, and he absorbs the full weight of the justice of God in our place so that you and I could be delivered out of the darkness and brought to the light. And then he rises again from the dead, and he's remaking the whole world. This is Christmas. And so with new ears, hear this, some of these lines from O Holy Night. O holy night, the stars are brightly shining. It is the night of the dear Savior's birth. Listen to this. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. A thrill of hope, the weary world rejoices, for yonder breaks a new and glorious morn. I want to invite you, would you stand with me?